Hi, this is Dan in Nature. I can hear a few birds very quietly off in the distance. I'm feeling anxious. My mouth is dry. My mouth feels dry. I can feel the tension in my teeth from clenching them. I'm lying down and I'm trying to feel all my feelings. It's hard, there's a lot of them. Many end up being filtered out because they're constant, uncomfortable. I do not have a PhD. I attended school for a very long time. Can you hear that car in the distance? Or does it sound like wind? I want to replace my microphone. That car for sure you can hear. And that one. Tapping. I hear a siren. That's a new sound. That tapping is also a new sound. Sound is pretty incredible. I mean, there's a lot of space between me and my neighbors. I'm a big fan of the world and the universe. I feel very special to be able to observe all of these patterns. One aspect that I appreciate about living in a tent is that I hear all of these sounds of nature. The vehicles, the birds, the tapping, the mowing, the chainsaws. I just heard a scream. It wasn't like a scary scream. The dogs barking, the people playing. When I want to get some quiet space, I have my trailer. Its plywood walls keep out a fair amount of sound. I'm feeling tired. My fingers feel cold. My toes feel cold. You know that show, The Good Place? Someone once said, choosing not to choose is still a choice. A couple of years ago, I read a book. I don't know what that was. A couple of years ago, I read a book by Michael Schur called How to Be Perfect. I think the title is intended to be comical. Michael Schur was the producer of The Good Place, a very funny show. And Michael Schur writes a short chapter on Jean-Paul Sartre, a French philosopher around the time of World War II. And I think he coined the phrase existentialism. I know what that was. I think I know what that was. A fuel can expanding as the fuel inside warms up and expands into a gas. My cousin Rebecca, I have to thank for recommending that book. And in that book, I read a chapter on Jean-Paul Sartre, a French philosopher from around the time of World War II. And I think he coined the phrase existentialism. And in that chapter, I read a paraphrase of a speech that Sartre made in 1945 at Club Now in Paris, titled "Existentialism is a Humanism." I studied that speech after reading Michael Schur's book. I think the quote I liked in Michael Schur's book was, which was actually a paraphrase of this Rush song, which references this speech. Choosing not to choose is still a choice. I wrestle with that one a little bit. Is that always true? Choosing not to choose is still a choice. It seems like what someone might call a truism. If I choose not to choose, then yes, I have made a choice. The choice of not choosing. Can I choose not to choose, and then a while later realize I had not been choosing for quite some time? I guess choosing not to choose is still a choice. And not choosing might not be a choice. That speech that I studied, that Jean-Paul Sartre lecture at Club Now. I don't speak French, so I studied a translation and a reading on YouTube. It's a long, like an hour and a half long lecture. The title is "Existentialism is a Humanism." And that lecture felt very powerful to me. It felt special to me in several different ways. My grandmother, my dad's mom, was born into a healthy, maybe a wealthy family in Poland, in Lodz. When she turned 9, she went from having a pony to living in a ghetto. And over the next 7 years, she slowly starved and learned to grab any scrap of food she could find and cherish it and share it with the people that take care of her, with the people who take care of each other. And after leaving the ghetto, she was brought to a concentration camp, Auschwitz. At 9 years old, she had 8 siblings, 7 brothers and a sister, 9 of them, and a mother and a father. And slowly, her siblings disappeared. Some of them moved to Canada. At 16, she lost her parents and all of her brothers, and her sister her younger sister, Aunt Regina. My grandmother was left to survive with her sister, Aunt Regina. And she did survive through 3 concentration camps before being rescued out of Bergen-Belsen in Germany. In 1945. I remember when I was young, there were very few stories I would hear her tell about her experiences. I remember her telling me that after the war, after they had been rescued, the survivors were so starved they would eat anything. People were eating whole raw onions like they were apples, I heard her say. And their bellies got sick. Later, I heard more stories before she died. I believe Jean-Paul Sartre was arrested during World War II. Imprisoned for his beliefs. And when a car passes through, when a loud engine cuts down a log, it clears all the other sounds out of the forest. Which can feel refreshing sometimes like a reset button. And then we can listen to the sounds coming back. When I'm using a chainsaw, I try to be very conscious of the sound that I'm making in the forest and the duration and the direction and the position. It's a lot of things to be cognizant of while cutting down a tree or slicing into a log. I felt like I connected to existentialism is a humanism in several different ways. And one of them was through its connection to World War II and choosing a new way of life. What I really wanted was to listen to a recording of Jean-Paul Sartre giving his famous lecture. To my knowledge, that is not available anywhere. Even in French, which I think is how he gave it. And then later he wrote down that lecture and I think published it, I believe, with some errors. But I can't know if there are errors in the published book because there are no recordings of his lecture. What I found was a recording in English of someone reading his lecture. I found that helpful in understanding some aspects, and I decided I wanted to make my own recording so I could listen to it, just like this podcast. My own recording that I could listen to and hear how I think Jean-Paul Sartre would have given that speech if he was giving it in English. I changed some words, but I didn't change many words. Obviously, I changed all the words because it was originally in French. I changed some of the words from the English translation that I used. I recorded that lecture and I have not posted it yet, but I might post it soon. What I was hoping to do was post my recording on some kind of version editing site. Because my recording is not how I want it to sound yet. It's close though. When I read Jean-Paul Sartre's lecture, I found it to be a little sexist, maybe quite sexist, referring to men as the decision makers and the breadwinners, and women as fools. And I tried to change some of that without changing the better message, which is that everyone gets to choose. And that's a very important message for me to remember And I would like everyone to be very conscious of the fact that they are able to choose at every moment and have to choose when to choose. I feel like it is too much to choose always. There's too many choices. So I choose when to choose. And I feel like that's different than choosing not to choose. Maybe that's it for this podcast. Maybe the title of this podcast is Choosing When to Choose. The title of this podcast is Choosing When to Choose. Because that's very different than choosing not to choose. I'm noticing on my phone right now, my daughter sent me a text. I said I am bored. That's what the text says. It's not funny. Why am I laughing? Because years from now, remembering this will be hilarious. I hope. This is Dan in Nature. Peace.